That song is so good. So good. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Molly, and in today's video I am going to be ranking all of M83's albums. So M83 is a band I've been a huge fan of for many years now, and I absolutely adore their music. They have a lot of albums that they've made that are all very unique, but M83's music is just, it has this really cool, atmospheric, dreamlike quality sound to it. It's electronic, but in a more subdued, restrained way. It's not like in-your-face electronic, if that makes sense, and I really like that. It's very calming, relaxing, sometimes nostalgic in a weird way. It's just really good. I enjoy their music, and I thought I would take it upon myself to rank all of their albums. So yeah, let's get started. As per usual, if you've seen my previous ranking videos, we'll just run through this real fast. A+ is absolute perfection. There's not really anything I can critique the album for. A is like this close to perfection. There's maybe just one or two tiny issues with it, but overall, I love it. B is just a solid album. Nothing terrible about it, nothing absolutely amazing about it, just kind of right in the middle. C is not bad by any means, just kind of fades away into the background for me, not a real standout. And then D is just albums that I personally don't like. Again, I'm not saying they're bad in any way, they're just not my favorites. So in this video, I'm just going to go through and rank all of M83's albums in order of when they were released. So that means we are starting off with M83's debut album called M83. It was released in 2001, and this album overall, I just found it to be a little bit of everything. It's kind of all over the place. I feel like the tracks can seem a little bit disjointed from each other. They don't seem to flow together real well. It's M83 honestly just trying to figure out their sound, which I feel like is understandable. That's probably what any artist would do on their first album, is just try and figure out a sound that works for them. And unfortunately for me, M83's debut album, it just didn't quite flow very cohesively for me when I listened to it. But certainly there are some like brilliant moments that do shine through. You kind of get a glimpse into what M83 later does with their music, which is some phenomenal stuff in my opinion. But their debut album, it's just not quite there for me. I feel kind of bad. I think I would put M83 in D. It's just a little too disjointed for me. Next up is M83's album Dead Cities, Red Seas, and Lost Ghosts. This album is so good. I love this album. It is basically taking all of the good sounds off of their debut album and putting them into one much more cohesive album that goes together seamlessly from track to track. It's honestly a huge turnaround for M83. This is only their second studio album, and it's already like 10 times better than their debut album, which I think is really impressive. I love how tracks on this album, like Unrecorded and America, play around with sounds and movie dialogue and just people speaking a lot, and they turn it into this very ethereal, atmospheric track that just works. It sounds so good. On a White Lake Near a Green Mountain is phenomenal. It's so powerful and it just gives you goosebumps. Gone, in my opinion, is an absolute masterpiece, one of M83's best songs by far. So my final consensus, I think, for Dead Cities, Red Seas, and Lost Ghosts, I honestly was going to put this album in A, but I think I should put it in A+, because there's really nothing I can critique it for. It works so well as an album, and there are some fantastic tracks on there, so I think I'm going to put that album in A+. That's crazy. M83's debut album is a D, and their sophomore album is an A+. That is certainly a turnaround. Next up is M83's album Before the Dawn Heals Us. This one came out in 2005, and my god, this album is good. I have nothing bad to say about this album. It just works so well. I find this album to be probably M83's, I guess you could say, darkest album. Like it's a little more intense. There's definitely, I feel like, some rock influences in this album too. A good example of this is the song, I think it's called Asterisk. It's just the asterisk symbol, that's all the song title is. But that song is pretty intense for an M83 track. It's got a lot of guitars going on and drums. A bold song for sure. One of my favorites on this album, to be honest. I also love how Before the Dawn Heals Us has a lot of ambient noises that M83 uses in a really cool way. Tracks like Let Men Burn Stars and Slight Night Shiver. Just how those tracks use the sound of fireworks and crickets chirping and cars driving by. It just gives you this amazing feeling of being somewhere in the world. That's just the vibe that M83 gives off, and I think it's through using ambient noises like this that helps achieve that feeling. And by far my favorite track off of Before the Dawn Heals Us is In the Cold I'm Standing. That song is so good. So good. I can't really say anything else other than it's just an experience to listen to. That's the only way I can describe it. So before I rave any more about this album, I think it's pretty clear to everyone at this point that Before the Dawn Heals Us gets an absolute A+ for me. This is my favorite M83 album, I think, and it just is absolutely phenomenal. I have nothing to critique it on. So next up is M83's album, Digital Shades Volume 1. I think this album is good. It's just not a standout for me. It's short, sweet, to the point, very relaxing to listen to, kind of cinematic. I feel like this could be almost a movie soundtrack album. By no means a bad album, it's just for me not a standout. There's not really any particular tracks on Digital Shades Volume 1 that I can pinpoint as being favorites or least favorites. They just kind of all blend together, which is good. I mean, that's what you want from an album, is everything to flow and be cohesive, but you also want your tracks to stand out at the same time. And I feel like this album, they kind of all just swim together. For that reason, I find this album to be a bit forgettable. It just kind of fades into the background. So I think I will put Digital Shades Volume 1 in C. I do prefer it over M83's debut album, and I think it is a better album, but just not a favorite of mine, kind of forgettable, not really one I go back to a ton to listen to. Alright, so next up is M83's 2008 album, Saturdays Equal Youth. This album, in my opinion, has some of M83's best songs on it. You Appearing as the opening track is so good, just a great start to the album. Skin of the Night is another fantastic track. I think the vocals on that one just work so seamlessly with the music. Very ethereal, very calm, soothing sound. Highway of Endless Dreams, that song just totally encapsulates its title in the sound. I don't know how else to put that into words. Just listen to it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just listen to Highway of Endless Dreams by M83 and you will get the feeling of standing on a highway void of all cars, looking off into the horizon, feeling like anything is possible. And Colors is another standout track on this album for me that, if I am being honest, I think is my favorite M83 song. And that's saying something because M83 has so many fantastic tracks. So clearly there are a lot of tracks on Saturdays Equal Youth that I absolutely love so much. However, there are also a couple of tracks on Saturdays Equal Youth that I feel like just don't quite fit. It's almost like they've been misplaced or something. So I think for that reason, for me, Saturdays Equal Youth would get an A. There's just a few missteps that this album has, but overall, fantastic, and definitely has some of my favorite M83 tracks on it. Next up is M83's 2011 album, Hurry Up We're Dreaming. I think if you asked most people who are familiar with M83 what their most popular or well-known album is, it's probably this one. And I think the reason for that is Hurry Up We're Dreaming has Midnight City on it, and that's the M83 song that I feel like everyone and their brother has heard. It's by far their most popular track, and for good reason. It's a really good song. Steve McQueen is so good. So there's some fantastic tracks on this album for sure. Another favorite of mine is Where the Boats Go. It's kind of a shorter track right off at the start of the album, but somehow in its short running time, it's such an immense song. It's got so much sound to it, and it's really cool. So Hurry Up We're Dreaming, I would say, I feel like it's a very big, expansive, almost like borderline orchestral sound that Hurry Up We're Dreaming has to it as an album overall, but it still has that M83 kind of electronic side to it, but it merges the two really well. Now there are a few kind of odd disjointed moments for me on Hurry Up We're Dreaming, and my interpretation of that is listening through to this album, it's almost like when you're dreaming, your mind can jump from dream to dream and there's no real connection between the two. You know, so the mood, the tone of your dreams can change quite quickly. And I think that's what this album was going for, at least that's my interpretation of it. Even though that logically makes sense to me, to listen to this album, it doesn't flow quite as well as I would like it to. So for those little like nitpicky reasons, I think Hurry Up We're Dreaming for me gets an A. I personally would put it, I think, underneath Saturdays Equal Youth, but it's such a good album. Like a classic M83 album for sure. Alright, next up is M83's 2016 album Junk. I will be honest, when this album first came out and I listened to it, I wasn't blown away. I wasn't overly impressed. There were one or two tracks on it I liked, but it just wasn't an album at the time of its release that I personally got into or found myself that drawn to. However, for the sake of this video, I recently, like a week ago, re-listened to Junk, and it's actually good. I really liked it a lot more than in 2016 when it came out. It's got a great upbeat kind of 80s pop vibe to it. A lot of M83's past albums are more dreamlike, a little bit calmer, very epic, kind of movie soundtrack, cinematic qualities to a lot of those albums. And Junk is just a fun album. It's upbeat, it kind of leans more toward the pop side of things, it's got that 80s sound to it. I think groovy would be a good word to describe Junk. Do It, Try It is a great start to this album, really upbeat, just a cool vibe to get the album underway. And then Solitude is another great track on Junk, kind of reminiscent of the sound that previous M83 albums had, kind of that slower, cinematic, more dramatic sound to it. But for me personally, I think Junk would be a B. If you had asked me in 2016 when I first listened to this album, I probably would have put it in C, but I really enjoyed listening to this album, so I think I'll be putting it in B. It's just an enjoyable listen. It's a fun little album. Alright, and last up is DSVII. I think it stands for Digital Shades Volume 2, but it's DSVII or 11, however you want to say it. This one came out in 2019, and it is M83's most recent album, and it honestly is exactly what a Digital Shades Volume 2 would be. It's very cinematic, it sounds like it could be part of a movie soundtrack. All of the tracks, they blend together really well, and again, for that reason, it's the same issue I had with Digital Shades Volume 1. All of the tracks on this album kind of just blend together. There's not any real standouts for me. It's just an album that I don't find myself going back to, at least right now. I could change my mind. Like a year from now, I could go back and listen to this album and just absolutely adore it. But for right now, it's just not my favorite. Definitely not a bad album at all. I think it has a great sound. It's more developed and thought out, I think, than Digital Shades Volume 1. But I think I'm still going to put DSVII in C. I would put it above Digital Shades Volume 1 though. Yeah, I think like that. I would put DSV2 in C. Alright, so there you have it. That is my final ranking of all of M83's albums. So, in A+, we have Before the Dawn Heals Us. This album deserves a slow clap, in my opinion. It is so good. And then also in A+, we have Dead Cities, Red Seas, and Lost Ghosts, another absolutely fantastic album. And then in A, we have Saturdays Equal Youth and Hurry Up We're Dreaming. I feel like these are kind of the two just classic M83 albums that have a lot of M83's probably most popular tracks on them. And then in B we have Junk. That's just a fun little album to listen to, some great songs on there. In C we have Digital Shades Volume 2, M83's newest album, and Digital Shades Volume 1. Both great albums, just kind of fade into the background for me, not super memorable. And then in D we have M83's debut album, just self-titled M83. Alright, so that is going to wrap up my ranking of all of M83's albums. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if there's any of you that are fans of M83, definitely let me know what your favorite album from M83 is down in the comments below. And if you've never heard of M83 before, please go check their music out. It's so good. They have a great discography of so many good tracks. But anyway, I'm just going to wrap this video up here, and as always, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you all next time.